I belong to no religion. My religion is love. Every heart is my temple, stated by a great poet Rumi. Dear students, in the earlier sessions, we had elaborately discussed about Bhakti movement as well as Sufism movement in India separately. Bhakti movement in Hinduism refers to ideas and engagement that emerged in the medieval era on love and devotion to religious concepts built around one or more gods and goddesses. Bhakti movement preached against the caste system using their local languages so that the message reached the masses. The tradition started from South India by Alvars and Nayanars. Alvars are the devotees of Lord Vishnu and Nayanars are the devotees of Lord Shiva. These devotees travelled to various places singing hymn in praising of the gods. Many temples were built that became sacred places of pilgrimage. The origin of Bhakti movement, the Bhakti tradition in South India, salient features of Bhakti tradition, Alvars or Nayanars of Tamil Nadu, leaders like Sankaracharya, Ramanuja, Madhavacharya, Vallabhacharya, Jnanadeva, Namadeva, Sant Eknath, Ramadas, Kabir, Guru Nanak, Siddhas, Yogis, Tukaram, female Bhaktis like Akka Mahadevi, Jnanabai, Mirabai, Andal for Bhakti movement were studied. Sufism may be best described as Islamic mysticism or asceticism, which through the belief and practices helps Muslims attain nearness to Allah by way of direct personal experience of God. While there are other suggested origins of the term Sufi, the word is largely believed to stem from the Arabic word "suf", which refers to the wool that was traditionally worn by mystics and ascetics. Belief in pursuing a path that leads to closeness with God, ultimately through encountering the divine in the hereafter, is a fundamental component of Islamic belief. However, in Sufi thought this proximity can be realized in this life. Far from being a minority articulation, Sufi orders and Sufi inspired organizations can be found throughout the Muslim world and beyond, and from Market and Manila, London to Lagos and everywhere in between. This module highlighted meaning of Sufism, Sufism in India, Sufis orders like Bashra and Bishra, characteristics of a Sufi, impact of Sufism, teachings of Sufism, Sufi philosophy, 4 stages of Sufism, main stages of Sufism like repentance, abstinence, renunciation, poverty, patience, trust and satisfaction. Today, in this lesson, my dear students, we are going to compare the Bhakti movement and Sufi movement in different aspects. Now, let us see the objectives. Make the students critically analyze, evaluate and compare Bhakti and Sufi movement in India. Help the students to appreciate the need for human-centric assertions. Third, pick up the assignments topics and to deal with them both in the skills of writing and presenting with an academic vigor. Now, let us see the introduction. The Bhakti and Sufi movement in India played an important role in bringing harmony between Hindus and Muslims. Bhakti movement. These two movements are well recognized around India to have shaped traditional singing into what is now. Singers and songwriters have been recognized the world over their work and their contribution. The Bhakti movement was a reform movement in Hinduism. It occupies a significant position in bringing about harmony and normal relationships between the Hindus and Muslims. The development of the Bhakti cult first began in South India in the 7th and 8th century in order to bridge the gulf between the Shaivas and the Vaishnavas. It stood for intense personal relations and devotion and complete self-surrender to God. It believed in the unity of Godhead, brotherhood of man and equality of all religions. The roots of the Bhakti movement can be traced to Upanishad, Puranas and Bhagavad Gita. Sankaracharya is reputed to have been the first and principal exponent of this reform movement. After the advent of Islam, in the necessity of making Hinduism a living active force in the life of the common people was felt deeply. Islam, with its liberal outlook, equality of status among its followers and concept of one God, posed great threat to Hindu society that was suffering from ritualism, rigid caste system, evils of untouchability and multiplicity of gods and divinities. In this context and situation, many lower class Hindus were attracted by the Catholic outlook of Islam in these respects. They were also tempted to adopt Islam, which would afford them better status in society. But at this critical juncture, the preachers of Bhakti movement tried to bring harmony among various religions. They often condemned the Hindu caste system through the Bhakti cult had a long tradition. It was during this time that cult grew to a new dimension. Therefore, my dear students, the Bhakti movement and Sufi movements had immensely influenced the Muslims and Hindus of the country at the time, and they are still sung to keep a reminder of how different things were in the older days. In the study material, my dear students, I have included features of Bhakti movement, impact of Bhakti movement, twofold aims of Sufi movement, and the difference between Bhakti movement and Sufi movement. Now let us see the features of Bhakti movement. Its prominence preached the unity of Godhead and emphasized that devotion to God and faith in Him led to salvation. It also laid stress on equality of all human beings and universal brotherhood. The other tenets of the Bhakti cult were purity of heart and honest behavior. The basic features of this cult thus had many similarities with those of Sufism. This helped greatly in checking the growth of Islam in India. What are the impacts of Bhakti movement? The Bhakti movement became popular among the common masses as its teachings were preached in the form of hymns in various popular languages. In this, accessible from Bhakti ideas were spread among wide divisions of the population, and the hymns frequently become folk songs. Among us, the leaders of the Bhakti movement, Kabir, Ramanuja, Nanak, etc. were the prominent. Now let us come to the Sufi movement. In Sufi movement, there are twofold aims: to make their own spiritual progress and to serve the mankind. Sufism, which started as a reform movement, laid emphasis on free thinking, liberal ideas and toleration. They believed the equality of all human beings and brotherhood of man. The concept of universal brotherhood and the humanitarian ideas of the Sufi saints attracted the Indian mind. I think the students are following my lecture. A movement similar to Sufism called the Bhakti cult was already afoot in India on the eve of the Muslim conquest of the country. The liberal minded Sufis were therefore welcome in India. The Sufi movement proved very helpful in bridging the gap between the followers of the two religions and in bringing the Hindus and the Muslims together. The Sufi movement gained energy during the reign of Akbar, who adopted a liberal religious policy under the influence of the Sufi saints. Abul Fazl has mentioned the existence of a 14 silsilas in India. A close link that existed between the leader and Beer and his disciples was a vital element of the Sufi system. The Sufi reached India in the 12th century AD. Its influence grew considerably during the 13th and 14th centuries. The Sufi movement in India helped in establishing peace and harmony among the Hindus and Muslims. Now let us see what are the major differences between Bhakti and Sufi movement. My dear students, you must know the major differences. India is known to the world as a birth as well as meeting place of various religious creeds and faiths. Apart from the oldest ancient Hinduism, India had given birth to Jainism and Buddhism, the two glorious religions which by the rich principles, ideas and philosophy not only saved Indians from superstitious beliefs and spiritual dogmas, but also enriched the ancient Hinduism which had been misinterpreted by Brahmanism. The two religions with their principles of non-violence and noble philosophy proved to be the sister religions of Hinduism. After them came Islam in the beginning of the medieval ages in India, which in spite of its principle of the universal brotherhood could not associate herself with Hinduism. It was due to the fact that the Islamic people were annoyed with the outer form of Hinduism, like elaborate the rites and rituals, polytheism and idolatry, etc. Of course, my dear students, they did not try to go out deep into Hindu philosophy. Islamic religious men and the Muslim rulers wanted to propagate the Islamic religion by adopting forceful methods. It was characterized as a militant religion. Muslims consider Hindus infidels, and Muslim rulers very often declared jihad on the eve of wars against Hindus. Muslim rulers of the Sultanate period did not treat Hindus properly. In the Hindu religious sentiments had received a rude setback when the Muslim rulers plundered and destroyed the Hindu temples. Antagonism between the two different sets of peoples continued to grow day by day. Religious supremacy made the Muslim rulers and people to exhibit mutual hatred and hostility towards their fellow Hindu citizens. At this critical hour of human ignorance and mutual hatred and hostility, there appeared a group of serious religious thinkers who by their Sufi and Bhakti movement awakened the people about God and religion. They did everything to establish brotherhood, love and friendship between Hindus and Muslims. Now let us trace the history. The Bhakti tradition can trace its origin to the end of the first millennium CE, and this Bhakti tradition began in South India in the 7th century. From its origin in South India, the Bhakti movement spread throughout East and North India beginning in the 15th century, while it reaches across many continents and cultures. While Sufism origins can be traced back to the early days of Islam in the 7th century, Arabian Peninsula, so it only came into prominence centuries later. Now, with regard to literature, you must know the Bhakti literature is rich in terms of poetry, while Sufi literature, on the other hand, is considered to be some of the best known classical literature in the Islamic world. They both share a common thing of being devoted to one all-powerful God who is beyond human comprehension and love for Him. Third, beliefs about God. Both traditions believe that God is all merciful and loves people unconditionally. However, Sufis believe that He loves Muslims above all else. With regard to nature, Bhakti focuses on prayer and meditation, while Sufi tradition is more mystic in nature. Now, when we think about the influence, my dear students, Hindus were influenced by the movement while Muslims followed in the Sufi movement. With regard to forms of worship, Bhakti movement saints performed bhajans to honor gods and divinities, while Qawwalis, a type of music used to encourage religious devotion and to promote religious devotion, were performed by Sufi saints. When you think about spread of the movement, the Bhakti movement have swept East and Northern India since the 15th century from the roots in South India spread of the movement, whereas it encompasses a variety of continents and civilizations. My dear students, you must know what is the essence of the movement Sufi. The scholars consider the Bhakti movement to be important social revival and reformation movement in Hinduism. While it is a religious order for any Islamic denomination and has been mistaken and another sect of Islam. The features of movement. The Bhakti movement share the divine's direct emotional and intellectual experiences, while Sufism places a strong emphasis on simplicity and austerity, which attracted large number of followers. Hindus were heavily impacted by the movement while it was mostly followed by Muslims. When you think about social reforms, they were against sati as well as female infanticide. The saints emphasized equality, disregarding the caste and criticizing institutionalized religion, while the Sufi movement promoted brotherhood and equality. Sufi saints also attempted to bring about societal changes. When you think about revival movement, scholars see the Bhakti movement as an influential social revival and reformation movement in Hinduism, while Sufism has been misinterpreted as another sect of Islam. However, it is a religious order open to all Islamic denominations. Famous prominents: it includes Kabir Das, C. Mahaprabhu, Nanak and Mirabai, while famous supporters of Sufism include Hassan of Basra, Amir Chishti. Now let us see the causes of the popularity of Bhakti movement. The causes of the popularity Bhakti movement are not far to seek. There are mainly two causes which are clearly seen behind its success. The first and foremost cause was the simplicity of Bhakti cult as well as the simplicity of its teachings. The second great cause was it was preached in the local languages. The results of the Bhakti movement were far reaching. First and foremost result was it was minimized the differences and the distinctions between the Hindus and the Muslims. The people of one religion tried to understand the people of other religion. Secondly, the caste system gradually lost its previous importance as the Bhakti preachers disregarded it. Thirdly, the spiritual life of the people became very simple and more developed than before. Lastly, the movement had a tremendous impact on the literature and language of the country. It helped the regional languages to get enriched in spreading the cult of Radha and Krishna. Bhakti literature were produced in plenty in different regional languages. In Orissa, Bhakti literature in Oriya language were produced by others, and this Bhakti movement has everlasting an influence on the people of India and outside. Even Akbar the Great was greatly influenced by the Bhakti and Sufi philosophers, which made him to follow a secular stand in the field of religion. Now let me summarize difference between Bhakti movement and Sufi movement. These are the two movements are well recognized around India to have shaped traditional singing into what it is now. Singers and songwriters have been recognized the world over their work and their contribution. These songs written and sung by them usually depict the times they live in, and it's either about how cruel the times were to them or the writers find the beauty in the times they lived in. The Bhakti movement and Sufi movements had immensely influenced Muslims and Hindus of the country at the time. They are still sung to keep a reminder of how different things were in the older days. Now to conclude of this comparison between two movements, the Bhakti movement and the Sufi movement are two of the most prominent movements in Hinduism and Islam respectively. The Bhakti movement is a tradition that has its roots in Hinduism, while Sufism Islamic practices to refer to a wide range of mystical and religious movements. So in this paper or in this article, in this material, we have tried to highlight the difference between these two traditions in terms of their history, the beliefs about the God, the nature of man's relationship with God, and some famous adherents. The Bhakti movement is an aesthetic devotional trend that arose in medieval India. Sufism is best described as an ascetic practices that helps believers achieve closeness to God via belief and practices. These two movements are widely regarded throughout India as having molded traditional significance into what it is today. The Bhakti and Sufi movements had a huge influence on the country's Muslims and Hindus at time, and they still remain people how different things were back then. That's all, my dear students. Have a nice day.